Hello and welcome to another Bodgit and Leggit video. Today we have a 2008 Mk4 2-litre diesel Mondeo and we are doing, what are we doing? We're doing, well, it's failed the test on ball joint and CV boots. Now, what I've advised the customer to do is buy a complete new wishbone, and not only that, to replace them on both sides, even though the other one has passed. A couple of reasons for that. One, the one on the left-hand side in England and Ireland always gets the most grief, because that's the one when you pull over, it hits the side of the road, it always gets the most grief. So if this one's given problems, that one isn't far behind, or vice versa. You know, just because it hasn't failed doesn't mean it's not going to fail. Also, we're replacing the whole wishbone rather than just the ball joint, and the wishbone is... This is the wishbone. As you can see, there's rivets in the ball joint. And for me to take this out, to spend time cutting these off, put them through, it's just going to cost a lot more in labour than what it would to buy the whole thing. So actually, even though you're spending more money in parts, you're saving money in labour. And not only that, you get the two bushings as well new. Because if this one's giving problems, well then this one, you know, is old and worn and going to give problems. So you could be changing this 2 months down the line, or changing this, and it's just a nightmare. So just change the whole thing at once. So much better, cheaper in the long run, and better. And if you do anything on one side of the car, always do it on the other side, because again, just for balance, just for absolutely everything. So we're going to install this, and also a new CV boot. And we'll also show you how to replace the rear axle bushings, because it's failed on that too. So there'll be two separate videos, one on the front, one on the rear. Let's get cracking, sorted. Right, Ford, don't know how many times I have to say it. Stop using these stupid, shitty nuts. They're crap, they're crap, they're crap. They're just crap. Stop it. Hi, dog can see the rabbit. What we need to do is take off the wishbone, and for that we don't need to disconnect the brakes, we don't need to disconnect suspension, we don't need to disconnect steering racks. We don't need to do any of that. I am going to be taking out the bolt for the CV joint just because we are doing a CV boot. If you wasn't, you don't need to take this nut out. So we've essentially only got two nuts and bolts at the back, a nut at the front, a bolt at the back, and a bolt here. That's essentially all we've got to take off. So I'm going to move the camera around, get you in better light, and we'll get cracking. Sorted. Right, we're underneath, and what I always find is easier first is to undo the ball joint first when everything else is connected. This is what's going to be the most difficult to get off. Now, you can be lucky and the whole thing might not spin, and what I mean by that is spin internally in the cup. If it doesn't spin, it's quite easy. If it does spin, we're going to have to put some weight on here and stop it. That's why I say it's best to lead the other bolts in to push this up, to give it some pressure. This one's a 21 mil, and they can be quite tight. So the first thing you need to do is drop the spanner, get another spanner. So what you want to do is put the other spanner on, get a bigger spanner, hook it onto it, hold your hand in the middle because it could slip off. Just gives you extra leverage to try, and I say try, I have to use both hands on here, you have to be careful. Oh, wow, that was tight. Be careful when you use both hands, you don't put one hand here because it could easily slip off. So I'm just going to keep spinning this until I get it off. I can only do a quarter of a turn at the time. You can turn the steering wheel out to give you a bit more room, but I'm not going to bore you with me turning this a tiny bit and a tiny bit. Once I get this off, if it doesn't spin, I won't turn the camera back on, but if it does, we'll have to put some pressure there. But once I get the bolt off, we'll continue. Now, hopefully you can see these. I've just lifted up a bit more just so I can get a bit more room. But some cars, you can have a problem with getting the spanner trapped between the bolt and the actual CV joint. As you can see, this is quite tight. Don't be tempted to try and hit this down when that happens, because the whole thing will spin. Just use the other end of the spanner, because if you try and hit this down, the whole thing's going to spin. You're going to have to lift it back up, and it can be an absolute nightmare. So that's the thing you can quite easily get caught out on. So we're lucky it didn't start spinning, because that can be a hassle in itself. But like I said, we'll just get a transmission jack here anyway, if it did. Now that bolt's come off. Now, because we're not worried about damaging the ball joint, because this one has already failed anyway, I'm just going to get the fork in there and I'm just going to smash it out. Now, just bear in mind when you do use this, on this particular car and some others, you've got a little plastic guard there to stop the ball joint rubber melting. You can push that back, so just, if you do this, just be aware of that and spin your wheel, because you can get a horrible scraping. A horrible scraping from your disc to your metal part there. There we go. All I'm bothered about is cracking it. At the minute, we'll see if we can completely undo it. It's not a problem if we can't at the minute, but if we can, we will. But we could just be under a bit too much pressure, and we are. So we're not worried about that yet. What I want to do now is undo these last 3 bolts. We've got an 18mm nut there, and we've got, sorry, an 18mm bolt. We've got 2 18mm bolts, but the nut is 24mm. It's in behind on top of the steering rack. There is no way I'm going to be able to get the camera in there, but once you're doing it, it's going to be so simple. I'm just going to whip off these 3 bolts. Once I've done that, we'll turn the camera back on. There's the head of the 2 bolts. As you can see, there's no way I'm going to be able to, because I have to come in from both sides. There's no way I'm going to be able to film that. But that's the 2 bolts we're taking off right there. And then there's the other one. Right, as you can see, we've got the bolts off, and the ball joint has decided to flip itself back into place, but that's not a problem. That ball joint now is under a hell of a lot of pressure. The way this back works is with that back bushing like that, it is very, very difficult to try and force it down. That's where this puppy comes in. I did do a tool review on this. This is from Welsh Works, which is 3200WW. It's their hub mate, goes on your transmission jack, which means now I can actually compress the suspension, which will make this lift up flat, and it will allow me to take it out, and it's not under pressure. And it's also going to allow me to install it. Especially with this type of bushing at the back, it's very, very difficult. You'll struggle to move that by hand because of the way it's designed. So this is where this tool is invaluable. Now, it might not look like it on camera, but believe me, that is at one hell of a angle. So as I push this up, be very careful, because all I need to do is just compress the suspension without lifting the car off the lift. So you do have to kind of be slow, but the suspension's going up, which means I can, oh yeah, shithead. And then I went arse over tit on camera there. And as you can see, how easy did that come out? And then he fell over the transmission jack. That only came out that easy because, oh, I just got that out of my nose, because of the transmission jack pushing the suspension up. That's how good that little gadget is. Absolutely brilliant. Right, I've just changed to these gloves now. I just took the other gloves off because I've got these underneath, because I'm now doing the CV joint, which is very oily, greasy and messy. But the reason why these hub mates are absolutely fantastic, because of this bushing, there is no way you're going to be able to twist this bushing. This bushing is just too strong, and it's not going to happen. Where the subframe is obviously straight, and if you try and put this at an angle, as you can see, it just will not go in. This needs to be straight to slide in. Not only that, the anti-roll bar and the debushing is actually bolted to the top of this, so you have to get this right, and at an angle this just will not go in. And if you try and put it in and then press this down again, you're going to struggle to try and force this down enough to get it in. So lifting the suspension up is just way easier. It's just so much easier. Yes, of course you can do it without it, but it makes life just so much easier with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it on. I've lowered it down so it's not under any pressure anymore. We're going to whip out this, I think it's a 13. It is a 13. Now, hopefully, this will come out quite easy without giving me too much grief. There we go. And now the wishbone's not in the way. It makes life so much easier. Now this has got a big split in it somewhere. There we go. Big, huge split in it. Cut this off, and we've got what's called a stretchy boot, which will allow me to stretch it over without having to take the CV joint off, which just, well, it's easier, quicker, and better. So we'll just rip off the clips first. And this one's a metal clip. We'll be replacing them with 2 metal clips. But I just want to get this off. Not worried about doing any more damage because the damage is already done. Cut this boot off. This is where these are just very messy to do. You just get covered in crap, so definitely want to wear gloves for this. But I wouldn't wear your good gloves, just disposable gloves. Now, 1/0 boot off. Now, it's a good time to get as much of the old grease out as you can. Now, lucky enough, this obviously hasn't been split for a long time because the grease is still nice and black. It hasn't kind of gone white mixed with a lot of water, which is good. What you would normally have to do is take off the CV joint, slide the new boot on. Now, the thing with that is they can be awkward to get off. You can damage them taking off, and it's just a nightmare. So if you don't have to, well, then you don't have to. I'm going to show you a way you don't bloody have to. Sorted. Right, I'll just give this a bit of a lube and a bit of a brush down, and same as inside there. But the other good thing, well, the other thing to remember is, especially with this type of ABS ring, all the grease and crap that came out got stuck on that ring. So just give it a good clean. Be careful with your ABS sensor. It can cause you problems in the future. Now, I've got what's called a universal stretchy CV boot. Really supple rubber, quality rubber as well, but it allows you to stretch it over here, and it just makes life a lot easier. Now, you can also do the inside ones. If you turn it inside out, stretch it over, and that will all allow you to do the inside ones as well. But what you need a gadget like this, and as you can see, as I press the button, it opens. Very simple. So what you do is you stretch the boot over it. Also, this boot, you can actually cut. You have different size rings to different size CV joints. So what I tend to do is I just leave everything on first, and I'll cut it to size on it as I need it. But as you can see, as I open that, that opens up, which will then allow me to slide it completely over, put it in there, release the pressure. This can be a bit tricky sometimes, just sliding it off, just depending on what style it is and how thick it is. So slide that off. And there we go. That's now slid off. And then we have one CV joint on. Just make sure it's the right way, which it is. So we'll just leave that up there for the minute, because what I want to do is I want to pack this full of grease, as much grease as I can get in there, because obviously we've lost grease when the hole is there, so we need to now pack grease, and you get that in the packet. So you get a special packet of grease, and what we can do is we'll just shove it all in at the minute. Not kind of worried about where it goes, but just get it all in there, and then we can worry about getting it worked in. You want to spend a few minutes at this, just get it all in. The more you get in, the better. Now, if your CV joint's already rattling, you need to change it. If the boot's been split for too long, don't even try and do this, because you won't be saving any money, because you'll be taking it back off again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this in by twisting this, getting it pushed in there as much as I can. Spend a few minutes at this. Really work it in there. You want to get it in there because obviously, so you, as you're doing that, that's actually pushing it in for me. It's really good. Once you're happy enough with it, you can then put the boot over. And let's see if we need to cut this or what we need to do with it. We're okay for the top one, for the actual shaft, but what are we like? This is where it just gets messy because this is just gonna, yeah. The joys of doing a. Now on this one, we don't need to cut. And this is the problem. No matter how clean you are, you just get it everywhere. So we don't actually need to adjust this one. Wipe all the grease off. Make sure that's slid in the right place, which is there, which it is. And there we go. Like I said, some, you know, depend on how big or small your CV joint is, there's different steps and you can actually cut it to suit. But as you can see, that is good. I don't want to move that too much until I get my clips on. So also in the package, you will get these metal clips, and again, you might need to cut them to size. You don't have to, it's just if they're too big, it's just easier to cut them. But again, on this one, I don't need to. All I need to do is get it as tight as I can. That's come off. It's one thing you do have to be careful, that when you put this on, they have a tendency, once you put them on and tighten, they have a tendency to slip. So you need to make sure that's definitely on. And that's definitely pushed down. It's in the little groove, so I'm just going to click it until I can't click it anymore. Now I can't click that anymore. Double check that everything is good. It is. Get the little machine and tighten that. All right, let's get you a bit closer so you can see the steps I'm talking about if you need to cut it. This is in its own grooves. We need to squeeze out, but make sure it is completely on all the way around because this has a tendency to slip up off the lip. Push that down, make sure everything is okay. Obviously we need another clip for here as well, but we'll sort that out in a second. Right, these are the tools. As you can see, it comes in and it cuts both ends in together, and it also pushes the middle out, if you can see that. So it does 3 actions at once to squeeze this together and to keep it pushed down. This is the special tool for it. If you're a cheap ass skinflint like Rob, he doesn't use these just because, you know, he can't open his wallet because it's just full of doubloons, and doubloons aren't legal tender anymore. And he's a skinflint. Tight arse. So you put this over. You do have to be careful. Hold it. Make sure it's not slipping because it does have a tendency to slip on you. Squeeze that in, and there we go. That's done. Now what I mean by slip, as you're squeezing it together, it tends to lift up and slip off its ridge, which you don't want. Now that's on. Now I can really kind of move it and just make sure we're okay. And there we go. So I'm happy with that. We'll get the other one on. What you have to do with some of these sometimes is that they come too long and you just have to cut them off. But on this one, well, on the other one I didn't need to. So we'll see what I need to do with this one. And no, didn't need to do it on this one either. This one is a lot easier. This one doesn't really tend to slip because of the way it is. It can't really slip off like this one can. Still have to be careful and make sure you get it right, but it just tends to be a lot easier to actually put on. And there we go. And clean up, because this, believe me, is just a mess. Now obviously with the wishbone not being there, it certainly makes life a hell of a lot easier. One CV boot on, sorted. So just kind of get a close-up of how, if the camera focuses, focus. There we go. pushes it in and also pushes it that way, keeps it on. Same with that one, nice and tight. Doesn't spin on itself and it hasn't flipped. And there we go, lovely. Thing I really like about these also is these are a really supple rubber, so they're not a hard rubber. They won't crack as easy as the old rubbers or the kind of the stiffer rubbers do. Lovely. Right, so we can get the CV joint back in for our wishbone to go in. Maybe this is just causing me a bit of a problem, so we'll take this off just to get that in. A bit more movement with this out. There we go. Now that's in. I want to tighten this 13mm bolt first because that'll keep everything kind of in. Once I get this 13mm bolt tightened, I'm going to put the hub mate back on and we'll get the wishbone in sorted. Now, I've done a few of these and it depends on the car to what you need to do. Sometimes it's best to put the ball joint in first and then slide the rest of the wishbone in. Sometimes it's best just to jack this up, put the wishbone in and then worry about the ball joint. It really does depend on the car. And I've done it a few ways. But what I think I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to jack this up, put the wishbone in, not worried about the ball joint area, just get the bolts kind of lined up, then we'll worry about the ball joint afterwards. I think that's the way I'm going to go with this one. So again, what we need to do is just jack this up nice and slowly, allow it time to compress the suspension without just lifting it. Checking it's not lifting it off the lift, because that's the last thing we want to do. But I want to get it up as far as I can. I think that's about it. Should give me a lot more room initially with the wishbone. Get this plastic out of the way. So as you can see now, I was able to get that wishbone nice and straight and in. But what I do need to do, all these bolts need Loctite on, but for the minute, I just want to kind of get this in place just so the wishbone won't come out. Now what I do need to do is I need to drop the suspension, because as I'm lifting up the suspension, I'm actually lifting up the anti-roll bar. So the bracket is a mile off the thing. They'll never line up. So what I need to do now is just kind of lower this down. See kind of where we are. Yeah, we're still off, but we're getting close. So what I might, and as you can see, it's not even bolted in, but that's kind of as far as I can push that down. So, you know, this back bushing is very difficult. With something like this, it just makes life a lot easier. But it has kind of pushed itself out. So what we need to do is spin the wheel to actually get. Has it come out? It has, yeah. The actual balls will come out the cup here. So that's why it's pushed away a bit more. So what I need to do is, the best way of doing this now, I need to lower this down. Oh, it's kind of going in. It's gone in a bit now, is it? Oh, it's gone in. Well, that makes your life a bit easier. Hasn't gone in fully though. Hasn't gone in fully. I don't want that to go too far out. But what I do need to do is just let that down. We need to spin this to push the balls back into the actual cup. So just need to disconnect this for the minute. Push them in, hook up the CV, hook up the ball joint, and that's it. We're on. Easiest way to do this is to kind of turn it, and it should hopefully kind of force itself back in. There we go. Now, we'll lift it up again, put it in, line everything up, job's a good one. These back bolts can still be annoying, I must admit. This still makes it easy, but it can be a bit annoying to get it lined up. Sometimes you need to put either a long screwdriver or something in just to kind of line up the holes before you put the bolts in. But apart from that, it's not too bad. Right, I'm having a bit of grief with this one. I couldn't get it in that way, and it keeps popping out of this cup here. The actual the spider inside the cup keeps popping out. So what I'm going to do is I've just hooked it on to the ball joint. I'm going to see if it kind of works this way. It's typical. Every one you film always has a problem, but it's problems we can overcome, and you can always overcome problems with throwing things, swearing. That always helps. So not really out enough yet. So what I might do is unhook it from there first again, kind of put it in there, but at the same time just get it in there. There we go. Just need to put that on just to stop it from falling back out. Now, that is, we're a mile away from here, but as we lean this down, it should go in. And again, it's because it's out of the cups, that's the problem. And I'm going to get in the way of the camera now. There we go. See how much that went in? Hopefully you did. Now people, that is very close. We're on here, we're not in, but we're only about ½ an inch away from all the holes, but at least we're physically lined up. So the next thing is just going to be a lot of kind of shuffling around, moving, maybe a bit of swearing, just to kind of get that in. One thing you also want to check is make sure that bracket is on top, which it is, it's not underneath. If it's underneath, you're in trouble. You're going to have to lift it up again. But all we need to do is this one really is about ½ an inch away from the hole. And I'd say once I take this off and kind of spin the wheel to push it into the cup, that should kind of slot into place. So like I said, it just depends on the car what method you use. But of course, when you're filming, you can always be sure it's never going to go. Oh, that's got in a bit more now as well. It's never going to go straight forward. So all I'm going to do now is, if it comes out the cup, you just spin the wheel and kind of hold the other drive shaft, and that will slot back into place. And then it's just going to be a case of kind of juddling this. There's no point me showing you because I'm going to have to be standing here getting in the way, but I'm just going to kind of be shuffling this into place, putting the bolts in, and that is essentially it. Once I've kind of got it into place, we'll turn the camera back on, tighten everything up. Job's a good one, sorted. People, I'm having a nightmare with this. I've loosened off the CV joint, I've pushed it all the way back, which has pushed the spider into the cup. So the CV joint now shouldn't be stopping us, because that's what's kind of stopping us. This is straight, so what I'm going to do is release this and try and get this pushed in. It's just a nightmare because I don't understand how it's so far out. Maybe thinking about it, what I'll do is I'll take the track rod end off, and then that should just allow me to get that straight back in. Just one of them things. Even taking the track rod end off can cause me problems. 21 mil. Typical, the side you film always is a nightmare. Now lucky enough that came off nice and easy. Now, we should have no reason now why this won't slide in. I think what's stopping me now is the actual transmission jack. CV joint has fallen out, but that's not a problem. So you have to kind of do two things at once here. Don't know why I took that off, because I needed that. Need to get that back in. Sorry if I'm in the way of the camera. That back in and that down. And at the same time, push that in. That's where you really need someone else. There we go. Oh. Lots of swearing and it's in. Now nothing is tightened, everything is loose. Because what we need to do is we need to put everything in, but we need to tighten it at the fully up position just to help the bushings. So we can have everything loosened in. And again, we need to make sure the ball joint bracket, the bracket for the anti-roll bar is where it should be. And as you can see, I can barely get my hands in, never mind get the camera in. And it's where it should be, which is obviously good. Make sure it will go in. Yeah, just need to put some Loctite on it. Well, again, no point me showing you. I just tighten in bolts now. But again, it is important to have that bracket on top of here. So I'm just tightening all these bolts up. This has got a lock nut on it, so this doesn't need Loctite. These 3 bolts here, they need Loctite. Torque them up to your factory spec. I'm going to use a heavy grunt, but you can get out the old manuals and see what factory specs they are. Again, I got to put the track control arm back on, and that really is essentially it. So yeah, as it turns out, just took that off and made my life a lot easier. The problem is it came out the spiders, which I knew it had done that, but I was just hoping to kind of get it in. But once I undid that bolt, used the hub mate and a few other things, the big lever bar, and it's in. So there we go. Lock tight, tighten them up, sorted, bang. Right, I'm finally there. I've just got to double check that everything's tight and bang on the wheel. Note to self, now I'm still getting used to this hub mate, but what really caused me a problem here was the CV joint kept coming out, the spider kept coming out. So note to self, next time just loosen the bolt to the CV joint. That's when, as you lift it up, it's not going to pull it away, and that would have just saved me so much hassle. So that's what I'm going to do next time. Hasn't really been an issue up until now, but it is, so that's what I'm going to do. So that's the Wishbone and the CV boot. Next part of this video is going to be the rear axle bushings, and that's it. So there we go, people. Hope it helps. Thumbs up, subscribe, all the usual. Don't forget, links up here, links down there, but most importantly, don't forget, get your hands dirty. See you for the next one. Sorted.